Here we are waiting for Tim on our first flight, and I thought maybe I'd just reflect a little about getting to this point. We thought we'd put all this on film. Hell, you never know. We might not survive the first flight. Worse things have happened, although I can't think of anyone personally who didn't survive the first flight, but at least we'll have this one documented. So while we're waiting for Tim to get over here so we can go do our air-to-air shoot, let's talk a little bit about how we got to this point, or how these airplanes get to a flying point. Usually you start off with an empennage kit, and it arrives in a box. Looks something like that. You get it out of the box, you do a little inventorying. Uh-oh, the computer just shut off. You do a little inventorying, you got a lot of parts laying around. Inventory everything, make sure it's all there. Remember, you only have 30 days, or you can't call up the manufacturer and say, oops, it's not all here. When all the parts arrive and you get them inventoried, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with all these parts? Am I going to have any left over or not? Well, let me give you a clue. There's so many parts in there that you don't know what they go to, that you go and you buy other parts because you need them at the time, and you don't know what the part is that as it appears in the kit. So you buy extra aluminum, you buy extra angle, all kinds of extra stuff. So by the time you're finished with this kit, you've still got a whole shelf full of parts, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, are they supposed to be in this airplane? Is it going to fly with these parts missing? Well, today we'll tell the tale. But I'll bet this plane flies just fine. I'll bet it flies to book speed. Vans builds a very good kit. This is my fourth attempt at an airplane. I helped Bill build his Velocity. I helped Boyd build on his RV8. I built another RV9 complete. And I did the better part of an RV7 and part of an RV10. So I was pretty well sold on RVs before I ever started thinking about what I was going to build for myself, and I chose the RV9a. It's got a nice wing, it flies well, it's rather docile, but it still goes 180 miles an hour. And we'll find out today if that really happens or not. I'll bet it does. You work on the tail till the tail's finished. Depends upon how often you want to work or how hard you want to work. It might be anywhere from a month to a year. I know people have taken longer. I know people that take less than a month. But at some point in time, it starts to really look like a tail, or at least the major components of the tail. After the tail's done, then you go to the next step. In Van's case, the case of this aircraft, we order the sequence, the tail, the wings, the fuselage, the finished kit, and so on. And when I called up Vans to order the wing kit and found out there was a 12-week lead time on the wings and then the fuse and then the finished kit, I thought, wow, I think I'll just order it all at once and save some of that lead time. So about 8 weeks, 10 weeks later, it shows up in 5 boxes or 4 boxes. Now, it's hard to believe that we go from these 4 boxes to the airplane that you see me sitting in. It takes a long time to get there, but it's hard to believe it arrives in those little bitty boxes. Now, those boxes contain everything but the engine and the avionics. So all those boxes arrive. Again, we go through all the inventory, try to get everything lined up, put away in some usable fashion, and then we start assembly. We build ourselves a little jig for the wing, and we start assembling components of the wing. And in my case, I did both wings at the same time, simultaneously. It takes a while. You get the wings done. The next thing you do is you start on the fuselage. And they say it looks a lot like a canoe. I don't know if it does or not, but mine wound up looking like this at that stage, somewhat like a canoe. From there, you get to figure out what you want to do about avionics, what are you going to do for an engine, and start on the avionics. Most of the fuselage is done. It's a good time to run all the wiring and all the hidden stuff. So we decide on the avionics. In my case, I went strictly Dynons and a GPS and an ADI-3 for the autopilot, a radio, and a transponder. Get that all cut out, get that fitted to the dash on the airplane, and then we get to mount the engine. The best idea is to get everything as wired up as you can before you completely close up the fuselage or whatever component it is that you're working on, so it stays to the point where you can actually get to it very reasonably well and get it put together. Then the next major hurdle, and it's a very time-consuming hurdle, is the sliding canopy. Of all the jobs on this aircraft, this was probably the most single thing, time-consuming wise, that there was. You learn a new vocabulary building a slider. Well, you maybe already knew that vocabulary, but you seldom ever used it until you got to the slider, and then it becomes a regular thing to do. Nothing seems to fit. Everything has to be trimmed and trimmed and trimmed, and eventually you get a real slider out of it. That might take 3 or 4 or 5 different attempts at various parts, but eventually you get a slider out of it. We chose the sliding canopy over the tip-up canopy because, one, to me it's sexier, and 2, you can taxi around with the canopy slit open in the heat. And right now, if I had a clamshell with the sun shining through it, I'd be pouring. It's a nice summer day here today, and at least with the canopy slid back, the sun not going through the canopy, it makes it a little more cool to do this with. Once that's done, final assembly is pretty simple. Get it put together enough to get it inspected, get the inspector out to look at it, get it signed off, which brings us to this first flight. This RV9a was delivered, the first part was delivered in September of 2005. It is now June of 2008. The plane is finished. It's ready for its first flight. It was a standard build kit as opposed to a fast build kit. So you're talking 1,500 to 2,000 hours. In my case, I've done it in about 1,400 hours. As you see it now, painted and everything. Yeah, this airplane is riveted together. It takes at least 2 people in most places to work on it. You do the grunt work yourself, get it ready, but the final assembly, at least the riveting part, you're a lot better off to use 2 people. And in my case, Bob helped a lot. Different people drop by occasionally to help out. So I can't really say I built this alone, but what you see is basically mine. It's my work. Bob has been a lot of help, at least in the last year or so. And now I get to return the favor and help him build his RV6. When I made the decision about the airplane, I had a basic paint scheme in my mind. And we kicked it around within the close group of people that were giving me a little help here and there. And we decided on a paint scheme. At first we decided we were going to fly this thing unpainted, like everyone else does, and then paint it. But 2 things kept nagging at me. Well, the first thing that nagged at me was the fact that half the time when you fly them unpainted, it takes years before you finally get the paint on them. And I wanted my airplane to look good. The other issue was, and we were still going to fly it unpainted, but then the other issue cropped up with a little problem with the registration and the FAA and sending things back and forth in the mail. And I thought, well, if it's going to take all this time, I'm going to start stripping it down and start painting. So the first flight on this little gal is going to be painted, completely finished, ready to go. And we just hope nothing has to be changed. I doubt that it will, so we're hoping we don't have to change it. It's painted. It looks good. Oh yeah, and I get about 14 gallons per mile. Just kidding. This thing should get about 20 miles to the gallon, straight shot. Should be as economical as my SUV, my small SUV. Right now we're anticipating a 7 to a 7.5 gallon per hour burn at cruise at roughly 165, 170 miles an hour.